folks, we're just going to give it another couple of minutes so that folks can get themselves on the call and situated. There's Lori. Hi, Mom.
Sorry.
Hi, everyone. Is it as nice where you are as it is here? Yeah.
Yeah, Alberta's beautiful right now.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah, it was pushing 27 on my deck at lunchtime, so.
Wow.
Wow. Wow.
It's a bit, and then humidex is a whole other story.
Yeah, we don't have that problem. Humidex, we don't even know that word in our dictionary in Alberta.
Right? Yeah, it's pretty dry.
Hot in Toronto, gonna have some thunderstorms.
Mm. You know humidity in Toronto.
Mm-hmm. I wait all year for it.
Okay, so let's see. Okay, folks, we'll just give it one more minute. Still see we've got some folks jumping on. Got some new faces today. New people coming on the call, so that's fantastic. So if anyone that hasn't been on one of these meetings before, please feel welcome to say hello in the chat window. We'll keep that open and we'll monitor that for questions. Okay, and people are really, there's a lineup at the gate.
Our format, is this like a maximum 1 hour thing? What are we, okay, it's a 1 hour thing.
Yeah, it's about 1 hour. Okay. Yeah, we'll keep it to around 1 hour. That's generally our standard format, Paul.
Right, short, for me, always short's good.
Short is sweet. Okay, well, I think we will go ahead and get started. And Dawn, if you can keep monitoring the waiting room and letting people in, that'd be fantastic.
Well,
I'll just remind everyone to please keep your mics muted. As much as I love hearing dogs barking and kids screaming like it is at my house, we'll keep the mics muted, and that'll help everyone stay focused. So welcome everyone. I'm Lisa Gleave. I'm the Manager of Operations and Programs here at the Atlantic Presenters Association. I would first like to acknowledge that I live and work on the traditional and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people, and I would like to take this moment to respectfully acknowledge the elders, both past and present. With that, I will hand it over to our moderator today. That is Raeesa Lalani. She is the incoming Artistic Director for the Prismatic Festival. So please welcome Raeesa and everyone else, and take it away.
Thank you so much. I also just want to acknowledge that I'm joining you from Chipuktuk in Mi'kmaq, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. And I am honored to work in these territories and to share in the cultural lives of residents of Mi'kmaq. So I want to thank you all so much for being here today for this incredibly important conversation. I know everyone is participating in so many calls, and we're all looking at creating contingency plans and finding new and innovative best practices and moving forward from this pandemic. But we need to take time, which is why we're here today, and make space to hear from the people that are creating the work, and that is the artists. And for us at Prismatic, we prioritize in presenting and holding space for Indigenous artists and artists of color. So today we are so lucky. We're going to hear from various artists across the country about some of their successes, some of their challenges, but most importantly, what they need to move forward so that we can help form and be a part of the solution for artists. And challenges are opportunities. And at Prismatic, we have always asked the artists what to do in difficult times in the performing arts. And again, today, we are turning to the artists for their guidance. And this is what we do. This is our practice of how we build everything. And one thing that I want you all to kind of keep in mind is that artists are the most economical and resourceful people. Artists make really good quality work with very little, and having this resourcefulness that these artists do enables having such a big business in the arts sector. And I know I keep repeating it, but I really want this message to be a takeaway from this conversation, is that we need to listen to what artists think. We do listen to policymakers and government and specialists, which is absolutely important as well, but the ones who know the most about their own communities and themselves are the artists. And we have to recognize that, and we cannot forget about them. We have to include them. So that is why we're here today, is to start that conversation. And we have incredibly talented, well-known Canadian artists joining us from all across the nation for this conversation to share their perspectives. So thank you all so much for being here, and we are going to get started right away. So first, we are going to hear from Paul Wong, who is a visual, media, and interdisciplinary artist all the way from Vancouver, BC. And Paul is a media maestro and makes art for site-specific spaces and screens of all size. He's an award-winning artist and curator who is known for pioneering early visual and media arts in Canada and has been an instrumental proponent to contemporary art. So Paul, thank you so much for being here with us. I know it's a little bit early for you, so we very much appreciate it. And I wanted to kind of start the conversation with you. I know that this has been a difficult time, so let's, unpack some of the challenges that you've faced and what you feel like you're going through. Is he
Paul,
in?
I think, Paul, you're muted.
You're
Mute.
muted.
There you
I'm
go.
good. Oh, hello again, everybody. I'm unmuted. I'm here in the unceded territory of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and the Squamish people. I'm here in my home on a beautiful Vancouver day. It's been a traumatic and challenging time. I tried not to scroll through too much stuff today, but, for marginalized peoples, Indigenous, artists of color, Chinese, Asian descent, the already marginalized are further marginalized, during this pandemic. As a senior at this time, Chinese Asian man who traveled back from China on January the 28th, fleeing from the pandemic spreading from Wuhan at that time and coming back to Vancouver as a masked man, was complicated and difficult. From the mixed messages we got from being masked or unmasked, and who is masked, and what is the purpose of a mask, and a mask having been a racialized viewpoint, is an interesting starting point, certainly for me as someone who came back. Hello? Am I on or am I off?
We can hear you.
Okay, so it's blanking on the screen here, so I'm sorry. Went into self-quarantine when I came home, semi-quarantined, and didn't want to go on the streets with my mask. And here we are 5-6 months later, with that mask issue as a public policy, as a political weapon, and as a who wears and who doesn't wear, when and when not to wear, is a problem. You know, we're talking here about artists of color and visible minorities, you know, being Chinese and Asian, navigating our everyday streets here is problematic. The amount of terror that the Asian Chinese community in Vancouver, in my communities, and elsewhere has been epidemic. It has allowed the polite, barely under the surface racism that we've always had here in Canada to now surface in bolder ways, from attacks of old people, to graffiti, to violence, to aggression. You know, I'm an artist that works and has a studio in Chinatown. And there's fear to already a Chinatown that was disappearing through gentrification, socioeconomic problems, issues in the neighborhood. These acts of terror is probably the nail in the coffin. The attacks on Chinese and Asians in Chinatown, it's no longer safe to be in Chinatown. There is fear in the community. I mean, that's kind of my starting point, is that that's a huge challenge right there. If people won't come to Chinatown, if I don't feel safe in Chinatown, what does that mean? I'm going to leave it at that.
Okay. So I'm going to keep moving on just to make sure we can hear from our artists, but I want to make sure that everyone can kind of take their questions, make sure to put it in the chat so that we can have a big conversation after this and go from there. So thank you so much for sharing that perspective with this call. It really does put a lot in perspective for us. So I'm going to call upon our next artist, who is Liliona Quarmyne, who is an incredibly talented dancer here in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Liliona has an eclectic background and a very wide range set of training and experience, including contemporary, modern, African ballet, hip hop, and jazz dance. She's a choreographer, dancer, actor, dance teacher, singer, community organizer, facilitator, so many hats, Liliona. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. And if you want to share some of your thoughts either on successes, challenges, or what you need to move forward in creation, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Raeesa. And Paul, thank you for your sharings and your perspective on what this time means. I'm also speaking from Chibuktuk, the unceded and territory of the Mi'kmaq. So greetings to all of you, wherever you are. I won't say much. I'm the artistic director of a dance organization called Kinetic Studio. And one of the things that we have been working very hard on over the past few years is trying to create spaces where artists of color feel safe to bring their bodies in relationship to other bodies. And I think one of the things that is most prominent in my mind right now is that act was already such a struggle. The histories of racism and oppression so deeply rooted that creating spheres of trust and was already such a struggle, and that the pandemic in many ways has really, it feels a little bit like the momentum that was starting to build has been just pulled out, and in many ways we're having to reinvent and start all over. And yeah, just the unveiling of how privilege functions in our societies, like seeing who the people are who are able to be innovative, who have the mental resources, the physical resources, the economic resources to innovate and come up with new ways of presenting art. It's just seeing it very clearly, seeing the disconnects in the artists with whom I work. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Liliona. So we'll keep moving along, and then once again, we'll come back for discussion. So next, we're going to hear from Michelle Thrush, who is a Canadian actress and First Nations activist for Indigenous Canadians. Michelle is a Gemini award-winning Cree artist and is known for her work in APTN's Blackstone, CBC's North of 60, and Arctic Air. And Michelle, once again, we sincerely appreciate your presence in today's conversation, so I will let you speak any of the thoughts that you have.
There we go. Thank you for that introduction. Thank you also to Paul. I love Paul. I haven't seen you in years, so good to see you virtually. And Liliona, thank you for your words. I really appreciate being a part of this circle. I'm speaking to you from Treaty 7 territory in southern Alberta here. Treaty 7 was signed in 1877, September at Blackfoot Crossing. I was past director of Making Treaty 7 for 4 years, which was a beautiful production that we had here. And I'm pleased to announce that I've actually stepped back on board with Making Treaty 7. And it hasn't been released publicly, so this is my first time talking about it as the leader of the company. So I'm excited about that, but not excited that we can't do a lot until we get through this struggle. I can only speak on behalf of what I know here in southern Alberta in the Calgary area. We created this company many years ago through Michael Green, who is a beautiful theater icon. Myself and Michael and a few others came together in 2012 and put together Making Treaty 7, and went on to bring together artists of absolute incredibly high caliber from southern Alberta, it was an indigenously led, settler supported company, and we had up to 16 in our cast, and it was Indigenous and non-Indigenous artists coming together, listening to the stories of the elders of this territory, and then bringing that medicine forward into performances, which were absolutely phenomenal. They were sold out every year. We'd have up to 2,000 people in our audience, and it really shifted the whole narrative of this territory. Never before had it been spoken about what this treaty territory was about, and it led to our mayor acknowledging the territory he was on, as well as opening up the doors for mass communication between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples using theater and poetry and performance. So that's something that we're looking at right now, is how to continue doing this with COVID happening here in all across the world, obviously, but how it's affecting us here in southern Alberta. One of the things that is really, that I've been doing is trying to reach out to the youth, which is something that we are going to be doing going forward with MT7 here in southern Alberta, is creating Zoom meetings for young people who are Indigenous and non-Indigenous, but again, Indigenously led, and having the alumni of Making Treaty 7 step forward and teach young people for the next however many months it takes. We're going to be doing workshops at least once every few weeks, opening that up, calling in the youth to come and receive any gifts they want to from the alumni performers. And then hopefully next year, we are going to be putting together a brand new huge show, but it's all going to be young people, and what this territory, what this land means to them, and how the elders are helping them to understand their connection to the land and the territory. So that's something I think we're just trying to work with what's happening right now. All of April and May, I was supposed to be on tour with Inner Elder, which is my one-woman show, which will be in Halifax, I believe, in October. So yeah, that really set us back too, because we were all prepared to leave. And yeah, it was really heartbreaking. I was supposed to be in National Arts Center for their Indigenous season, and then moving from there to Sudbury and then across to Vancouver. So I was really disappointed about that. It's been quite a struggle as an Indigenous performer as it is to find work and to be able to execute that beyond COVID. Here in Calgary area, we have been trying very hard to keep the profile of Indigenous performers happening, and I'm excited. It's not quite as developed as it is in Toronto, of course, or Winnipeg, but we are stepping up with our presence here of allowing young people now to come forward and to be able to train them so that they can use their voices to speak about their experiences. And that to me is something that I think is really important. Through my career, I've never just relied on gigs in, you know, theaters or in film. I've always reached out to community and worked so much with young people. And that to me is how we are going to be going forward, is investing in them to create their skills. And that's what we're looking at right now in Calgary, is just ways to continue investing in the youth here and having an Indigenously led, settler supported type of theater projects going forward, creating safe spaces. We've got really great support from One Yellow Rabbit and Theatre Calgary and all sorts of different companies here to be able to create safe spaces so that Indigenous people feel like they're included. Something that we did, which was quite beautiful in January, I directed a show here called Our Canada, Our Story, which was produced by Action Dignity. And Action Dignity is an organization in Calgary that is available for immigration for newcomers to Canada. They are the first organization you would be in touch with if you arrived in Canada from around the world. And they reached out to me about creating a show in which we put on at the Martha Cohen, which is a big, beautiful A house here in Calgary. And we brought 5 youth onto stage. 3 were Sudanese, 1 was from China, and the last one was Indigenous. And we brought those young people who had never before stepped on a stage. And we nurtured they created monologues, and we put them into stories, and then hired professional actors to step in as their parents, and created a beautiful show. But not only was it beautiful, produced again by Action Dignity and Arts Commons, not only was it beautiful for those youth, but we took over the whole Arts Commons building, which is a big theater complex in Calgary, and put all kinds of people of colors, booths and dances and poetry. And we just filled the whole building with faces of color. And it was the most beautiful thing to see people feeling comfortable there, because that's something that doesn't really happen a lot, is having people of color in the theater. And so I sat there in the Martha Cohen Theater watching these young people on stage, but I also saw all these women coming in with hijabs and all these different colors of people entering into a space that normally they don't feel comfortable being a part of. And to me, that was absolute beauty and success. And that's something I want to see more of in Alberta, is just having people feel like they are home when they are able to come into a theater and watch a show that's written and directed by people of color, Indigenous people. So that's basically our goal here in Alberta, is to keep creating those safe spaces and to allow people of color to feel comfortable in theater. Done.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. So we're going to move on to our next speaker, and then we'll circle back. Our next speaker is Monique Mojica, a Gunna and Rabahanak Nations actor and playwright who is passionately dedicated to a theatrical practice as an act of healing, of reclaiming historical cultural memory, and of resistance. And Monique has an impressive resume. She's a playwright, a director, an actor, is a founding member of Native Earth Performing Arts, has taught Indigenous theater in theory, process and practice at many universities and much more. So Monique, thank you for sharing the space with us today and being present in this conversation. And if you have any thoughts that you want to share with us, please do. Might just have to unmute your mic there. Thank you.
Right button. Noedi. Anuga olo nadili, olo edibili, ganosok ka. So I'm Kuna and Rappahannock by birth and adopted into the Cayuga Bear clan of the Haudenosaunee. I also want to thank Paul and Liliona for framing where we are as we're having this conversation. As a theater artist, it's been really, really hard to think about doing theater in this context. I've been often annoyed by a lot of the pressure or messages that business as usual, back to normal. We should be productive now. Look at all the time we have. Willie wrote King Lear during the plague, so get going. I really think that for me, this time has been about being present and being in a pandemic. And really looking at what that means, what that feels like, examining, as Liliana said, when the veils are falling away like they never have before in our lifetimes, to really look at that. I also started this experience returning from Asia, Paul. I came back on March 20th, right before the borders closed. And it was really, really interesting and difficult and harrowing to come from a place where so many precautions were in place and people were protected and people wear masks often, to land in Pearson Airport where there was nothing, absolutely nothing. So for me, the terror was coming from a place where I felt relatively safe to a very dangerous situation in Canada. And also traveling, because I was not born in Canada, I do not claim to be either Canadian or American. I never will. Nevertheless, I have to travel on a passport of the country where I was born, which is the US. So I have a US passport and a status card from the federal government in Canada, which means that they didn't know what to do with me crossing borders in places like Abu Dhabi. So I had to be pulled aside and they had to call Canadian immigration to see if they could let me get on the plane and those kinds of things. So being questionable for who you are has always been a territory that I've navigated as an Indigenous person, but during this, it was even, it was worse. I also lost a family member to COVID, May 4th. Kevin Tarrant, my cousin's husband, was a performer. Our families have been interconnected for 100 years. He was a drum keeper, a song catcher, a knowledge carrier, and he was also with his wife, my cousin, Muriel Morse Tarrant, one of the producers of the Directors Festival that happened in January at La Mama and New York Theater Workshop. So we lost a really important person in our family and in the Indigenous community in New York City, which is even more invisible than it is in other places in the world. I have been blessed, personally, to be treated like the senior citizen that I am, and I have stayed home. I've really not left my home except to go throw out my garbage, and I'm blessed to have friends who look in on me, check on me, do my shopping. And I think those are the things that I've really been, it's really the basics that I have been focused on. I have a mother in New York City in the epicenter of the pandemic. I have an aunt in New York City in the epicenter of the pandemic who are quite elderly. They are 80s and 90s respectively, and they are matriarchs of Indigenous theater. Incredibly vulnerable, but they're well. A lot of my energy and time, when I talk about the basics, I'm talking about mom support and everything that that entails. You know, making sure that she doesn't have to worry about trying to cook or get groceries in and getting prepared meals. I mean, just the real basic stuff. I mean, she is in an artist building, which is great because Westbeth, which is artist housing in Greenwich Village, has floor captains and they're checking in on all their people, but it's been to the bone. And I can't talk about where I am today without mentioning what's going on in Minneapolis and Central Park. And that we have a situation here in Toronto last night where a young Black woman fell to her death in High Park, and her family is quite clear in saying that the police threw her off that balcony. These are the things that are coming to light for me in a really big way. The cop who murdered, I'm sorry, his name just went out of my mind. The man in Minneapolis who was killed, somebody help me. Someone remember his name?
George Floyd is his name. George
Floyd. The cop who murdered George Floyd also murdered a Native man some years ago, 2006. And in Minneapolis, when the American Indian movement was founded in 1969, it was founded largely to respond to police brutality against Native people living there. So all of these things are swirling, and this is the soup I'm in. In that soup, I've had to show up for friends and colleagues like Santee Smith, who is a dancer, and have her dancers Zoom situation like this and figure out, okay, we were supposed to be in workshop, how do we go on? When you've got dancers who need their bodies and we've got talking heads. You know? So we did the best that we could all the time, really acknowledging that we are in this thing that I mean, she's doing this futuristic, post-apocalyptic show, so it helped in some ways, but in other ways it was like, how do you do an embodied process when you got talking heads? I had to show up for another friend and colleague, Yolanda Bonnell, as reading as an actor this time. With Santee, I work as a dramaturg primarily, and sometimes as a performer, but primarily as her dramaturg, responsible for the narrative and pulling the story together and looking at where we're drawing our research and resources. And reading a new script online like this with, you know, people looking like Brady Bunch was really, really unsatisfying for me. You know, as an actor, where you have no energy to pass back and forth to people. So I'm one of those folks, and maybe it's just because I'm old, I'm one of those folks that doesn't feel that going forward in performances, live performance, online, cyber, is going to be fulfilling or satisfying. It doesn't feel like theater. It feels like something, it feels like a Band-Aid. It's something that we're forced into out of necessity. And I'm glad that we have the tool that we can at least look at each other and work on a certain level, but it's very reductive in terms of the artist's mind. And, you know, for my own work, for my own creative work, if I don't have my body, you know, I work in land-based embodied generation. You know, I don't start out with a text. I start out with my body and the land. I start out with my body and the stories from land, from family, from lineage. So if I don't have my body, I'm not doing theater. And for the time being, that's okay. It's been okay for me not to be doing theater. It's been more than okay for me not to be doing theater, because I've been answering the phone in the wee hours of the morning to find out that someone has died. So for me, that's the equation. That's the soup.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you. Sorry, continue if you had something else.
No, I just said I'm done talking.
Oh, thank you so much. And we're really sorry to hear about your family member, and we appreciate you sharing that with us and sharing your feelings with us. And actually, Santee is our last artist that we're going to hear from before we open it up for questions. So I will introduce her to you all. She is a multidisciplinary artist, award-winning producer and choreographer, the founding and managing artistic director of Kahawi Dance Theater, and the newest chancellor of McMaster University. And Santee, thank you so much for being here with us. And I'm sure you can kind of touch on what Monique was saying and take it a little further for us.
Great. Hi, everyone. Scano. Thanks for inviting me to be a part of the discussion. And I'm sorry I'm late. I lost track of the time difference. So I thought I was going to be early, and I'm late. So I missed everything and all your words. So that's unfortunate for me. But yeah, so I guess just touching base, Monique and I have been gone through, I think we did a month of online creation, really a lot of research and tasks that people could do on throughout the week. And then we would come together like this as a Zoom. So happy to be able to continue to do our artistic work in a way that is not typical, but the pros on that for me was all my collaborators, my performers were able to dig into the material a little bit more than allowed time. Now we have, for me personally, I have a weird sense of time. My time schedule is like gone out the door. I've been staying up all hours of the night and waking up late. So the time change has and shift has allowed for my artists to invest in the content and the meaning and their characters and all of the things that I wanted everybody to have time to do previously, when we were always in a mad scramble to get things to creation production. So that's been one of the positives out of that. Going forward, you know, everybody's on this sort of wait and see what's going to happen. Wait, and I'm waiting on. So my next season for Kahawi is pretty much non-existent in terms of performances. Within the past 2 weeks, I've heard back from and had conversations with our presenters, as we're scheduled to be touring the Mush Hole in the fall. So we had, you know, the NAC and Sanderson Center and Ontario Presents block booking. And so we are postponing for a year. So one thing that I'll be just focusing on is our 2 new creations, which is Skana and Homelands. So we'll be able to continue working on that, doing virtual performances, and I'll be a part of the Celebration of Nations happening in September for our performance of Blood, Water, Earth, live stream performance. I'm based here at home on Six Nations, and we have a company called Through the Red Door, which is this audio and sound studio. So hopefully they've been opening up slowly to, I know Lacey Hill just did a live stream performance from there. So we have some resources. I have a little studio that I'm working out of and videotaping powwow boot camps and things like that. Creatively, I'm still working, but slowly. Everything has come down to a very slow pace, and I don't mind that. I'm also doing a lot of planting, so I've been spending a lot of time working on 2 gardens, and veggie gardens and flower gardens, and also finding time to do other things that are helping me cope with, I guess, the change, like sewing face masks. And then also as the Chancellor of McMaster University, my whole, right now would have been a very busy time getting ready for spring convocation. So all of my messaging has been videotaped. So I also have 3 more videotape messages that I have to send out today. So I'm having to do self-tapes, and so that's kind of just a touch base with where I am. How we left off before lockdown is we were on the tour of the Mush Hole. And we were going to go to Washington, D.C. Those 2 shows got canceled, thank goodness, because we would have been sort of right in the bad, high traffic time for transmission of COVID. And so that's postponed for a year. We decided the day before we were supposed to fly out that we couldn't do it, we couldn't go. And I was very concerned for, of course, my artists. I had some 3 youth that were involved with it as well, and I didn't want to have anybody in harm's way. So we canceled. So that was lucky in a way that the bulk of our tour was complete and we were able to share that work. And then we were really looking forward to being at the National Museum of the American Indian in Washington, D.C. to share that. And a lot of work preparing, as you would know, about getting across the border, workers' visas, all of that has just sort of just evaporated at that point. Yeah. Oh, I see Monique mask arrived. Yes, the mail is very slow, so I'm mailing out masks. And somebody from the States ordered and then posted it was going to take up to 3 weeks or more to get to the States because everybody is doing online mailing.
2 weeks from down the road.
What is this?
2 weeks, right?
Developing the work. Oh yes, developing the work about body. And so my work also is. And working with Monique, it has been land-based. And obviously embodied work. That's my main tool. Surprisingly, I have been very disembodied. Not surprisingly, but surprisingly, because I have all the opportunity in the space to be active in my body, and I'm not. There's a lack of motivation, which is surprising for me because I would think that now I have all this time and opportunity to just really, I could be out there improving, 5 hours a day, but the lack of motivation to be in my body is one of the surprising moments of and as a dancer, as a lifelong dancer, it's also might be just sort of, it's a part of that shift that I am going through personally. And it's not that I'm not ever going to go and get back in there. I mean, I've been embodied in different ways, like gardening and hoeing and digging and things like that, but not creating, performance content. So that's the interesting part I will continue. I was planning on being in upstate New York in our homelands in the Adirondacks in July. That's a place that I go and I connect, and it's very isolated. But with the border crossing, I don't think I'll be able to go. And that's being connected to, it's our traditional homelands, and I've been going there for, well, throughout my whole life, but recently the last 3 years to do creative work, and Monique has been there as well. And so that is something that we're there's a possibility for live performance to continue if you're outside and social distanced, set up, and spaced apart outside. Also with Celebration of Nations in October, we're planning to do an outside performance in Niagara-on-the-Lake. So that would be in a garden setting, and people would be outside. And so we're just looking to see how that might unfold for October.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. Since we're kind of getting short on time a little bit, I'm just going to ask a couple of the questions, and any of the artists that are panelists, feel free to just jump in and answer these questions. I just want to make sure we can get to a couple of them. But thank you so much for sharing that all with us, Santee. Mm-hmm. So the first question that we have is from Tim Yerksa. And he asks, as presenters, our role is to bring artistic experiences to the public. And I think, Santee, that was actually a really good segue as well. What do our artist panelists feel should be the role of presenters right now, or what could it be? What ideas you have brewing in your imagination that could involve presenters? So anyone that might have a response to that, please go ahead, just unmute your mic.
Hi. Thanks, everybody, for your words. Kind of put me in a panic listening to all of you. A lot of things about the notion of home and safety and productivity. And, as presenters, I've always done work as an artist to share ideas and bring people together. And I have been a screen-based artist, but so much of has been bringing people alive, that kind of interaction, and this kind of isolation and separation, because so many of us come out of isolation and from segregation and from outsider margins. So I think it's very privileged to be able to operate with operating funding and core funding, which leaves out a lot of the independence. But specifically, I think answering a question that Tim and Shaheen has, what can we do? I know that in Chinatown, there has been a few actions by artists to bring attention, to raise funds, to create, for the artists to take some kind of role. I know I just met with I do a thing called Pride in Chinatown, which is a queer festival, which is very new, just barely in year 3. And I've decided to segue not online, but to take back our streets. And I've just spoken with some leaders in Chinatown about some actions on how we can do that without having huge public gatherings. And it's to have some actions with our community, friends, and allies to literally take back our streets by showing up. I'm also taking the festival at a later date to have sites throughout Chinatown that you can just visit. So it's literally coming out of and really going onto the streets and activating artists to do interventions that invites participation from our community to just come, because that's what's really needed. We need to be present, and as a senior artist, that's kind of just something I've come up with this week. You know, it's been a slow process of sorting through all this and what we can do. And once again, it's exhausting work. You know, we're back to square one. You know, we are the advocates, we're the activists, we're the creators, and we're the leaders organizing on the grassroots level once again. I'm done.
Thanks, Paul. Actually, I did one more quick question for you. Lindsay was just asking you what the name of the festival is.
Pride in Chinatown.
Perfect, thank you. All right, so does any other artists have something that they want to say to that question before we address any others? I want to make sure I give you the space to say it.
Yeah, so maybe I can just jump in and follow along with Paul. And thank you, all of you, for your sharings. And Santee was talking about the shifting notion of time in this time that we're all in. And I know that my personal experience and the experience of many artists of color with whom I've been in contact over this time is that that sense, oh, sorry, the conversation, like my whole body is vibrating from all the things that have come up in this conversation, so apologies. But for many artists of color, the time that many people have gotten in this to reflect, to think, to reevaluate, I know a lot of us have not had that time. We play so many different roles in our communities, and people are turning to us because they need us and they need our support. And so many of us are like, have gone into these overdrive modes and have been in overdrive, some of us for the past 40 years and some of us for the past 10 weeks, right? So I think in thinking about what directions artistic organizations can take moving forward, is it possible to create spaces and where artists of color are given space and time and support to do some of the processing and then to do some of the creation out of that processing that I think is really, really necessary, as we avoid the idea of, oh, back to normal, rush back in, like let's, dive in and rebuild the economy and do all that kind of stuff, which, is problematic in so many ways. But so how can artists of color be supported to not have to participate so deeply in that already oppressive mentality? And what art projects can be supported that come from a different place?
I want to build on that just a little bit, what you just said, Liliana, and what Paul said about community and coming from community. I think that we're a lot, it's unavoidable that we have to be somewhat waiting for whatever government decrees are coming down, but the things that are going to move and change have to come from us as communities, no matter what part of that community we have. And there's two things that I wanted to say. I forgot to mention one of the things that I was involved in during this past month was getting PPE and food to a Métis community called Beauval in northern Saskatchewan, because they were left out of everything. And then when the roads closed up there were people who had nothing and no way out to go buy food. So it again was a small group of friends and family connected directly or indirectly to people living there that came together and got them some relief before the government support has arrived there. And in terms of the other part of the question, I like what Liliana said about space to process what we've been through, but it's also before that there's an acknowledgement. There has to be an acknowledgement that Indigenous artists and artists of color are going to process differently. I mean, there's been a lot of criticism of the we're all in this together kind of platitude, because we're really not. And what Santee said about time and about not being embodied when you're always embodied as a way of being, as a way of life, as a lifelong journey, makes perfect sense to me, because we have in our bodies that very blood memory of living through pandemics before. We've been here before, and quite recently. So even if we don't have that lived experience, it's there. It's there. That knowledge, that nightmare is very, very close to us. So having to live in it, assimilate it, digest it, is going to take quite a while before we turn it into art. And I think my biggest question for presenters is, how are they going to make room for those of us who create different than the usual structure of playwright in isolation, dramaturg on paper, actors around the table, then you block, then you rehearse, then you're open. How are you going to make space differently? What Santee said about outdoor performance, I think, is really important. It made me think about, are we returning to more of a activation of artists and performance as ceremony? If it's connected to being outdoors. I saw on some of the chat there about, calling for the government to release the cap on how many people together. And I used to say a resounding no, absolutely not. Because the people that would put in most jeopardy are those of us who are already the most vulnerable. Douglas, ready.
Any other comments from our panelists for that one? Okay.
I was going to say that, one of the actions that I just met with on Monday, this Pride in Chinatown, and it's a call for action, maybe as soon as, we're thinking Canada Day, and it's literally to ask people to come, take our streets, and stand 2 meters apart. And that could be 20 people or hundreds of people, to stand our ground. It's a simple action. I haven't quite figured it out yet. I just thought of it on Monday and talked to one of our leaders in Chinatown and trying to figure that out. So it's a simple action, participatory, come, stand with us 2 meters apart and fill the streets of Chinatown. Because it's important to be visible. It's important to show our numbers. I mean, that's, and to share that space and to claim that space. It's a simple action, and I hope that we can certainly do that with widespread support within the Chinatown community as a starting point. That's it.
Thank you. So we are at 1:59. I have one more question that I want to get to, just to make sure that we kind of represent all of them. So I appreciate everyone staying on for a few extra minutes, if that's okay with you. If you have to go, of course, that is no problem. There's another question here from Lindsay that says, what supports can organizations offer to lessen the gap? What budget line items are we forgetting to include when asking for what artists need to present work in these times? Does any of the artist panelists have any comment about that question?
Oh, I don't know if this answers directly, but it's something that I was just in conversations because Skana is supposed to premiere. It was supposed to premiere at First Ontario Performing Arts in St. Catharines through a production residency and a premiere February 2021. So that is not happening at that time. So as artists and presenters in theaters work together, we are going to keep our interaction and relationship going, and the creating of the work happening, producing of the work. So the aim is to get to a premiere at some point when it's possible in theater. But in the meantime, the time that was scheduled for February 2021, Gahawi would work on a sort of like a virtual premiere. So this is not a, we have to figure out what that is. That is sort of like just keeping the energy of the work happening. It could be a video, it could be a series of live stream performance, again, like at a sound studio, and that the First Ontario would also be invested in supporting that as we move forward, and then eventually getting to a full premiere of the work. So that's kind of a way of like a segue of like keeping the relationship happening, keeping the work happening. And so that, you know, for me as a small dance company, I'm the only full-time employee. I also want to be able to keep my artists working as well. So that's what I would like to have happen. And in that way, it is possible then that we could continue working throughout the next upcoming year. I don't know if that helps.
Okay, well, I think we'll end it there. I just want to thank you all once again so much for coming out to this conversation. We know that the people that are going to build the work for the future are the artists, and we've identified this is where the gap is, and this is hopefully going to be, you know, one of the first of many conversations, and we're really glad that this conversation has started now so that we can move forward with it. And we know we're talking about the unknown, but this is going to be a really good step in the right direction. To all of the artists panelists, thank you so much for taking the time out to be here with us today. APA, thank you for helping us put this together as well. We'll have this recording, so if you're looking to get the recording, please just email me and let me know, and we'll make sure to get that out to you. But once again, thank you so much for being here with all of us.
Thanks, Raeesa. And thank you so much, everyone. We're honored and privileged to hear your voices. We're going to do part 2 of this conversation. We'll be in the planning phase, so stay tuned for that. Thank you so much, and have a good day.
No, I thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you, Monique. See you.
Bye.
Bye.
I don't want to go.
You never want to go, Shaheen.
I'm just going to sit here till you cut us off.
I'm leaving the meeting.
It's just very nice to see everybody's face.
Nice to see yours too.
Thank you. Yep, I'm just going to sit here.
I am too. I'm not going anywhere.
Until Lisa cuts us off.
I think that was some really valuable stuff to hear.
Yes, I feel like we should have scheduled longer time, and because it's a longer conversation, and so yeah, so let's plan a part 2, maybe in
Absolutely.
3-4 weeks, and we'll continue the conversation, because really, really so important to hear everyone's voices. Yeah.
And beside, I think just beside creating the space, I have written down so many solutions that I like coming out of, by listening to the challenges and the frustration with a lot of things that are happening. But at the same time, those are giving life to solutions. How do we move forward? And I'm glad we did this. And so many new things that I wasn't thinking about, like this is the issue of what Monique was talking about, working with the body and the land.
Yeah.
If we can't have our spaces indoor, maybe we need to talk to the governments to have our spaces outdoor, and with following the regulations of space and keeping the space, and at least coming out and taking space, like Paul was saying, coming out and keeping safe distance and creating some work and being present and continuing work. If we can't work indoor, then maybe we have to work outdoor. Or thank you everybody for just moving it forward. That's I think that's the important thing.
Me too.
Thank you, Raeesa, for all your work in this.
Yeah, Raeesa, you're awesome.
Great group of people.
Yeah, you and Lisa are awesome.
Lisa, we're awesome.
Yeah.
Woohoo!
I'm serious. I'm not saying it because
Bye, friend.
This is it's very different from most of the conversations that are happening out there. And two of you did a very good job at it and putting it out there. And now I think we have a new way of looking at these solutions and at this issue of performing arts moving forward. Raeesa and Lisa just did it, and now I think it's gonna start it in the rest of the country too. So yeah, good job, great job.
Thank you. Well, I think I will click us off now. So we will make this recording available to people when they request it, and I can send a link to you as well, so you have it.
That'd be great, yeah.
And yeah, we'll be in touch to plan part 2.
Sounds
Okay.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Everybody.
Bye.